I have lost over 70 pounds in about 4 months.
Meet Jerome from the YouTube channel Finally Fasting.
Fasting has not only changed my life, it saved my life.
Jerome shares exactly what he's done to lose more than 70 pounds in less than 120 days.
I started with a 42-hour fast.
But even beyond the tactics, Jerome also shares all the personal struggles he experiences.
I do have an issue when it comes to portion control. I do suffer from binge eating disorder.
So if you've ever felt like giving up, or if you've been struggling to get started,
I told myself, Jerome, you've done this and you've done it so successfully before. Why can't you do it today? And I feel like a big part of that was...
Find out from Jerome as he shares everything about his own personal weight loss journey.
My name is Jerome. I have been struggling with being overweight, obese, pretty much my entire life. Ever since I was a child, I can remember just being the chubby one. And then again through adolescence and then my adult life, getting obese. And, I guess the technical term is morbidly obese too. At 5'3", I'm not a tall person. At my heaviest, I weighed around 235 pounds. And I have gained weight and lost weight and gained weight and lost weight. But currently on the journey I'm at right now, I have lost over 70 pounds in about 4 months. I'm currently less than 10 pounds to goal. I think about 7 pounds to goal to be 140. So I'm at the very tail end of my weight journey, if you may, but still a very long journey to go, a lifelong journey, because then it's going to be about maintenance.
How did you lose 70 pounds in 118 days? Like, what does your fasting strategy look like?
I'm not new to fasting. I have fasted in the past, but before then it was just OMAD or even a 16-8. In 2018, I actually did an 11-day fast out of the blue, cold turkey, also cut caffeine completely. And I didn't have a fun time, if I'm being honest. It just was not enjoyable for me. I did not really know what I was doing then. But I obviously gained the weight back then too, because I didn't know about how to keep fasting properly. But in 2019, I had decided to give it another shot, but maybe not go 11 days, and played it by ear when it came to fasting. And that's when I started doing rolling fasts. And if we fast forward to my current journey, in November of 2023, I set a plan out because I had some knowledge of what I did in the past that gave me success. I started with a 42-hour fast. After that 42-hour fast, I was going to eat for a short amount of time, like a small refeed. And I believe then it was under an hour. And then after that 42-hour fast, I told myself I was going to do a 65-hour fast with, I think, a 2-hour refeed. And then after that, it was going to be rolling 90s, which means I would fast for at least 90 hours and then refeed for around a 4-hour eating window, and just repeat that process over and over and over again, because that's what gave me success before and is giving me success right now. I talked about how, yes, I've lost 70 pounds in about 4 months, but I think I lost the first 50 pounds in maybe 60 days. I was losing about a pound a day for about the first 40 to 50 pounds, I believe.
And so, you said you're just 10 pounds shy of your ultimate goal weight. So I imagine the weight's starting to come off a little bit more slowly now. Is that the case?
It is the case. So I think the thing that's a little different with me is my refeeding windows, even though they're 4 hours, I can put a lot of calories down. And that can be 4,000 calories on the low end, but sometimes on the high end, it's 6,000 or 7,000 calories in a 4-hour refeed. So at this point of where I'm at, the weight is slowly coming off. So even though I'll perform a 90-hour fast, sometimes I'm only losing 0.5 pounds, like half a pound in a 90-hour fast. Sometimes it's only a pound at the most. So it is slowing down. But as discouraging as that might be for a lot of people, because I know I'm not the only one who looks at that scale and uses it as the motivator, I have learned to tell myself to trust the process and continue doing these rolling fasts. And even though it's gone slow and I've had some days where the weight didn't go down even after a 4-day fast, I'm just telling myself, just keep going, just do it again. And then all of a sudden the weight starts coming off again.
I think that's such an important point. And obviously that's where you help a lot of people out, is you've got this experience where you know that if you keep pushing forward, the scale will eventually move. But yeah, that's discouraging, right? Like, oh, I just didn't eat for 4 days and I only lost half a pound. Like, why am I even doing this anymore? It will kick back in at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I keep reminding myself and others as well is to keep looking at the other non-scale victories, right? To think about, how has your energy been feeling? How have you been sleeping? Do the clothes that might have been tight before, even though the scale isn't going down, do they fit better? And that's one of the things that I love doing too, is I'll put clothes in my closet that don't fit me the best, and I just keep them right in the front. And once a week or once every other week, I'll try them on and just see how they fit. And usually that will keep me going, even if the scale isn't showing what I want to see.
And you employ so many neat and useful kind of tricks and hacks, if you will. I watched one of your videos and you mentioned how one of the things you do to overcome hunger pains at time, it's not always the best financially, but at times you will go clothes shopping and you'll purchase clothes that if you gain the weight back, you're not going to be able to fit into. So it's honestly, it's like adding more motivation to that fire, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. I know, and you're right. It isn't the most financial like decision to make, but sometimes you need to do a little for yourself to get that motivation like underneath you. And I do find that just, it's also a way where you're not thinking about food, right? You're kind of thinking about the other things in your life that are important to you. Not that clothes are the most important thing to you, but maybe it's time to stop spending $50 on DoorDash and put that money elsewhere, where maybe it benefits you and doing other things other than eating all the time with other people.
Let me jump back though real quick to something that you mentioned, because I'm sure if somebody is new to hearing your story, they're going to be like, wait a minute, did he really just say that? You said you have a 4-hour refeeding window and you eat between 4,000 and 7,000 calories. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't actually use any calorie restriction, food restrictions, calorie counting during your refeeding windows. Is that correct?
That is correct. So yes, when it comes to macro counting, I don't count how much protein I'm getting in. I don't count how many carbs I'm taking. And then as far as the types of foods that I eat, it's pretty much fair game in that eating window. And I know that isn't typically how people should eat, or that they should eat that amount. But one of the things that I really haven't discussed, and one of the issues that I face, is I do have an issue when it comes to portion control. I do suffer from binge eating disorder, and it's been a process. And it's been a process that I've been dealing with for decades in my life. And right now, this is the solution, if you may, to figuring out how to battle binge eating disorder. And it isn't perfect, but as I keep doing this, as I'm building experience doing these rolling fasts, I am starting to structure the way I eat. And sometimes I do look at eating my protein and like my vegetables at the very beginning, because I know if I'm going to start with pizza or chips or
eat
cookies,
the whole pizza.
Yeah, and I'm not going to want to eat that salad I had planned to eat. So there is a lot of learning throughout doing this, and it's also why I will always tell people, like, I never tell people how they should eat or how much they should eat or how long they should fast for, because this is a journey for yourself and it's going to be different for everyone.
That's part of the reason I fell in love with fasting in the first place, is because, it gave me really quick weight loss results, right? That physical transformation. But even beyond the physical transformation were the internal things, that internal transformation that came secondary to actually going through the process. So I'm all about one step at a time. And for a lot of people that I've met over the years, the first step is just change something. And if you want like immediate results, don't worry about what you're eating, worry about when you're eating. Because if you start fasting, you're going to lose weight, and usually success compounds and snowballs over time. And I think that's what you're essentially saying here is the first step for you was to decrease the amount of time that you were eating. And now as a result, especially getting closer to maintenance, now you're starting to think about, okay, what better decisions can I make moving forward with what I'm eating?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I think one of the things that I have always been trying to push, not only on myself, but just when I am talking on YouTube or I'm making these videos, is the importance of just doing it, right? Like getting the experience under your belt, like building that fasting muscle. And it really isn't even just about fasting, it's all the other parts. And I've talked about this in the past. I'd like to look at weight loss as different levers, if you may, right? So you have a lever when it comes to fasting, and you have a lever when it comes to exercise, and then your diet. And you might not have your fasting lever at like the highest place it needs to be, but then you can turn up the levers where you're really good at it. And one of the things that I think about too is it's all about experience. You're not going to know what you're capable of until you start actually doing it. You're not going to figure out how long you can really fast for until you start doing it. And that really comes with failure. That comes with stumbling and maybe not hitting your goals, but realizing I've done this before, I can do it again. I might not enjoy eating this, but I find out when I do eat this, I feel better or I feel more energetic. It's, again, your personal journey, and it's something that you can keep changing and tweaking. And that's also the beauty of fasting, because it's so flexible. A lot of people wonder if they just need to keep doing a longer fast than last time. And that isn't the case at all. It's just some days you might want to do a 72, and then the next day you might just want to do an OMAD for maybe even 3 days in a row before you decide to get on a longer one. But it's doing that process over and over to really figure out what works for you.
Yeah, and the flexibility that you mentioned, that's exactly why I've been using it for nearly 10 years now. And yeah, I think of it in levers too. The two main levers that, I've been coaching for probably 7 years now is when you eat and what you eat. And depending on how high one's dialed up, the other one can be dialed back down. Fasting is easier to dial up than what you eat because it requires less thought and less decisions. Like, am I eating? No, I'm not eating, so I don't have to think about what I'm eating.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it too. And that's one of the things I love too about fasting is when I know I'm going to do an extended fast, the first thing I do when I wake up is I tell myself, well, today's not an eating day. There's no negotiating it whatsoever. Some of the troubles that people have is they start thinking, should I eat today? Yeah. I just need to break. I'm just going to have a little bit. But if sometimes you have that mindset of, no, today's not an eating day. I have things to do. I have to work. I have other priorities that take over eating. I think it becomes easier when you start applying that mindset in your mind.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's really important, because oftentimes, myself included, I've done this in the past where I'm not 100% determined ahead of time. And so those justifications start popping into my head. Like you said, should I eat today? How do you, other than waking up in the morning and just setting your mind to doing it, how would you coach somebody who's struggling with that? Because that's something we all struggle with, right? Is how do we do what we need to do instead of what we want to do? How do you get through that?
Yeah, so there are two trains of thought when it comes to this. One is it's life, and life happens, and sometimes a social event is going to come around, and that is your decision of whether you're going to eat and break or you're going to fast throughout the day. There have been so many times where I will still put myself out at a social event, especially recently, and I'm not going to eat, and everyone else is eating, and it might feel a little awkward. But for me, it's just usually when people ask, you're not eating? I'm like, no, I'm good. I mean, it's going to depend person to person, obviously, on how you want to respond to something like that. But for me, I just keep it like short and simple, or, I'll say, oh, I'm going to be eating later. Like, I'm good. But the other train of thought, the other way to look at it is, yeah, you give in, right? And sometimes it's okay to give in. It's okay that life happens. It's okay if you don't hit your specific hour that you initially targeted yourself for. I think the more important part is that when you do break and I talk about this a lot, is you have a backup plan. You think of a way of managing, if you want to call it damage,
Yeah.
it's kind of minimizing that damage. Saying, okay, I'm going to break. I'm not going to hit my hours, but I'm only going to refeed for this amount of time. I'm going to eat what I'm craving. I'm going to eat because I was asked to eat and it feels awkward if I don't. And I'm just going to have this dinner. And as soon as it ends, I'm going to open my app and I'm going to start the timer again. I think a lot of us, or at least in my personal experience, when I don't hit my specific number in the past, what I would do is I wouldn't even open the app anymore. I'd just be like, forget it. I'm just going to eat and who cares what it says. But then that ends up rolling or snowballing into something way worse, where then I'll just eat when I come home at night. And sometimes that turns into a binge and then that rolls into the next day. And that's the slippery slope that I've been trying to get myself out of and trying to teach myself better habits instead of just repeating the same process of cycling with my weight or binging.
It almost comes back to just knowing yourself well enough to know, if I decide to break in this moment, what are going to be the repercussions? What are going to be the downstream actions that I tend to engage in? Recognize those and then prevent those from happening. Sometimes, like, in all honesty, like, this is the real world. Like, nothing ever happens perfectly. Sometimes the best decision is to not break your fast, because if you really step back and give yourself a self-assessment, it's like, this is probably going to lead to a 3-day binge and it's going to set me back months, right? But if you really understand that, yeah, I'm making the conscious decision to break here and I can get right back on the horse immediately afterwards, then I think that goes back to what you were saying about learning from failures. As long as you're failing forward and learning more about yourself, then the next time can be better.
Yeah, it is really about that personal journey. I don't think everything will always be in that upward trajectory of success. It's not going to be like that. Life is going to happen and you really just have to roll with the punches. I know it sounds cliche, but it's one of those things that kind of keeps me going, is knowing that, yeah, it's a bad day. And I will say this. The one thing that was really tough for me is when I was initially on YouTube and I had lost all the weight and I kept it off for about half a year. And then I let my emotional eating, I let my binge eating disorder take over. And my first action was to hide from it. I hid, and I hid for over 2 years, almost 2.5 years. I was gone from YouTube. People on YouTube thought I died. These rumors were going around like, what happened to Jerome? Is he okay? Now that I look back at it, this is where that personal journey is so important, is that people want to see the ups and downs. I think that's something I've learned too, is like, I'm not perfect. I'm not an influencer who has a 6-pack. I'm not an influencer that says eat these foods and only eat these foods for the rest of your life. I am someone who does love food, and in a lot of ways I am addicted to food, and it's something that I'm still trying to battle with in my brain and trying to change. But you're only going to know how to do that as you continue your progress, as you continue to take care of yourself and be a healthier version of you.
I think that's why your content resonates with so many people, is because everybody's in the real world. Nobody's got that perfect life, and you're sharing what you're working through. The key point too, though, is that you're actually working on these things and you're taking those steps forward, even when you don't know that it's the right thing to do or the best path forward. You're at least still walking forward on that path.
Yeah, I want to kind of actually nail that point down again, because I know what I'm doing isn't perfect. I know that. I eat things that I probably shouldn't eat. I do eat processed foods, right? I'll drink an occasional Diet Coke. Those things happen, and I know that they're not the best for me, but I'm also being honest with myself. This is what happens and this is what I do. Even when it comes to fasting, sometimes a lot of people, I'll hear them say, hey, I wish I could just live on an island for a month or 3 months, because if I was just there by myself and I had no other distractions, then I could do all of this. I could fast and I'd lose all this weight. But that isn't how life works. Real
Right.
life doesn't work that way. And what happens when you're off that
Yeah,
island
what
and
happens
now
when you
you
get rescued from the island? Then what do you do?
exactly. And then it's about figuring out, how am I going to keep this weight off? And these scenarios, being in real life and going through these ups and downs, it's so important. I sometimes I'll call it failure, but it really isn't failure. This is just your life, and this is just personal growth. And the more you can accept personal growth happening instead of thinking, oh, the day is shot, I'm just going to throw it away. One of the things I love to say to people too is, don't wait till Monday. Yep. Don't wait till the first of the month. Don't wait till after your birthday passes, because when you keep waiting for that, you're just repeating the cycle over and over again. When people talk about New Year's resolutions, that isn't the first time you've given yourself that resolution. I can almost guarantee you've told yourself this time and time again, like, life is right now and you should just live it. And I'm one to speak because I've done the exact same thing, but this is me trying to motivate myself too, to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I remember when I first got, certified as a nutrition coach. It was the simplest concept, but it was so profound to me at the time. Even though, like, I'll say it out loud and everybody listening to this will be like, yeah, well, of course. But it was such a huge, profound thing for me. You say, don't wait until Monday. When I learned that you could start over immediately and not wait till the next day, like after you go to sleep and wake up the next morning. For me, I literally spent a year stuck in this cycle where I wasn't gaining weight, but I wasn't losing any weight, and I wasn't making any meaningful progress towards my goals that I wanted to, because I would do really well Monday through Friday. And because I was so strict with all of my rules, I would get to Friday and be like, whoa, it's the weekend. I just want to enjoy myself now. And I would just go off the rails. Monday would roll in. I'd be like 4 or 5 pounds heavier than I was on Friday. So it's start over. And I did that for a year. And so, this simple concept of don't wait till Monday. You can start over right, in the middle of a binge, for example. You can you can catch yourself, be like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I don't need to be doing this. I'm not even hungry right now. And just stop.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's really about just remembering to be accountable. For whatever reason, if I wanted to binge, I think it's more important that I accept that and I stop the timer. And then as soon as I finish whatever I'm trying to crave, I eat it and then I start the timer again. I think doing that shows some accountability. It shows that you're just not giving up. This is you going through the process and learning about it. And the more I keep hitting that timer over and over and doing what I'm doing, I'm just learning more about myself. I feel like I'm unraveling parts about myself that I didn't know before. And that's why I feel like the mentality part, the mindset, is such an important piece when it comes to this, because it isn't just what the science is. It isn't what just the numbers say. That's why everyone's so different, because we all think differently and we all look at things differently.
Well, yeah, there are some people out there that they just want to understand the why behind how it works. And that's enough motivation for them to be like, okay, I understand that this works. This is how it works. Now I'm going to do it. But for most of us, I would argue, they're like you and me, where it's you don't actually learn whether or not something works for you until you actually test it out and try it for yourself.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too how people perceive things or how they go about things or what motivates them, because it is so different for everyone else. And it really solidifies the fact for me that that's why when I try to help other people or I try to give advice, I can only give them my advice through personal experience, but always hearing their story too. It is profound for me. You learn new things all the time.
Well, yeah, and you find others to relate to too, because one of the things that really drew me to you was, so when I first started fasting, I was recovering from drug addiction, and I noticed that I was transferring my previous addiction to now food. And for like a year and a half, I thought I had a binge eating disorder, but I was still doing fasting, right? And if I had have gone to the literature at the time, most of the fasting experts and doctors and other people you talk to will tell you if you struggle with binge eating, you shouldn't be doing fasting because 9 times out of 10, it exacerbates it. But what I found was that it actually put me in a place to regain control over those binge patterns and over those cravings and desires. So let's dive into that in case anyone else is listening and they're like, well, yeah, I struggle with food addiction. You call it binge eating. What exactly are you talking about when you're talking about binge eating?
My issue with binge eating, and it's interesting because sometimes people in the comments are like, but you're eating that much. Isn't that binge eating? And my short answer to that is no. One, because I know I can eat a lot. And for me, I eat until satiety, until I feel full, versus binge eating, which I have never, ever recorded myself doing on camera, because I will record myself eating and showing people what I eat and that I can eat that much food. And it isn't to brag and be like, this is how much I can eat. Although sometimes I'm a little proud of it, but at the same time, when it comes to binge eating, completely different story. A binge for me, it's eating to satiety and more. It's eating because I am struggling with stress or I'm struggling with an issue and I don't want to think about it. And it's me forcing food down because that numbs the pain for me. It gives me comfort. And when I talk about eating 4,000 to 6,000 or 7,000 calories in a refeed, a binge is probably double or triple that throughout the day. And it's just nonstop. And it's when I wake up again in the morning, because sometimes in the morning it's like, oh, I got to do these things for work. I don't really want to do it. And this expands to more than just binge eating. It then becomes a point where I throw the day away. Financial wise, I don't think about what I'm spending my money on. So if it ends up being $100 order from Grubhub, it's $100 order from Grubhub, and multiple times a day. It's not doing the work I'm supposed to be doing. It's not texting people back or replying to people because all I want to do is not worry about anything and just eat. And that's kind of what I define as a binge, because it radiates more than just my eating. It pretty much is me destroying my life. And that's the cycle I have been trying to get out of forever.
And that's interesting too. I'm just going off of my own experience too. When I did the same things, you're right. It wasn't just the food choices that I was making in the quantity or the quality. It was everything in order to escape from that immediate feeling that I didn't want to feel anymore. I would look for anything and everything that could take me out of myself.
Yeah. And the interesting part about that too is I'm finding, so this is where I talk about the experience of doing these fasts, and fasting gives me control from binge eating. Even when I'm refeeding for that amount of time, it's only for that amount of time. That's kind of where I tell myself, okay, I'm going to turn the switch off and I'm just going to crave what I crave and take in what I want to take in. But I've also noticed that when I turn that switch back on and I'm back into fasting, I pay more attention to my work and things that are going on, and I'm more productive in my life. But I will say, just like you said, you start finding other things to kind of fill in those gaps. So I've noticed too, so now that I don't use food to alleviate stress, now that I don't use food for comfort, even though I do at times when I refeed, but for the most part, when I'm fasting and I'm not using food, I'm noticing myself doing other things instead. And I've said this before on my live streams, but there's a couch behind me and a TV, and I will lay on that couch even though I know I have a deadline that's due for work. And I'll lay on that couch and I'll watch TV and I just try to forget about it. And I'm just like, oh, this is what's happening now. I'm not eating, but I'm using something else to really escape. And that's part of the process. That's part of the journey. That's part of what I'm talking about in therapy now is, why am I doing this? And why am I now finding other ways to be lazy or to escape or what have you? And this is, for me, I think it is a profound thing because I get to learn about myself every single day. I'm learning so much more about myself because I'm not using food anymore as the easy out.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Essentially, it goes back to what you were saying with the whole personal development side of this is you're removing the most immediate temptation. You're learning a lot. I mean, if you think about it this way, each time you're doing a refeed, you get to practice the skill of not overeating and engaging in binge eating, because you could, if you wanted to, you're an adult, nobody's telling you what to do. You could keep eating for the next 7 weeks as much as you want, but you're practicing that. But now that you're removing it, it's bringing all of these other things to light that you then recognize, well, these are the actual underlying issues that I need to work on and address and fix if I want this to be a long-term lifestyle change.
Yeah, and I just love that I'm able to recognize that now. And that is the difference between me when I first lost all this weight through fasting versus where I'm at today. I feel like I'm a lot more introspective. I feel like I have a lot better control of what's happening in my mind, which I think ultimately will help me when I have those bad days, because I know those bad days are going to come. And I know that when they're coming, they're probably going to hit really hard. And I'm just trying to practice what I've learned now over the last couple of months and apply it when those hard times come through.
You've been so open about sharing this on YouTube, right? Which takes a lot of courage, just like a bunch of strangers. I'm just going to, put this out there for everyone to see and judge and hear. But how has that played a role in your, this time around, staying on track?
It's actually everything to me. The being accountable is being public on YouTube, on Instagram, right? When I was gone from YouTube for almost 2.5 years and I was binge eating, it wasn't always like that. There were parts of me that wanted to get back on track, and I tried. I tried so hard. I tried to even just do OMAD again, and I couldn't get through it. And I couldn't figure out why. I told myself, Jerome, you've done this and you've done it so successfully before. Why can't you do it today? And I feel like a big part of that was I wasn't accountable. I can tell myself I'm going to do a 90-hour fast. And when I'm doing a 90-hour fast, if for some reason at the 30-hour mark, I don't want to do it anymore, I'll stop, because nobody knows about it. The only person that knows about it is myself. I can't hold myself accountable. So I honestly use YouTube and the other social media platforms as a way to be transparent and accountable and tell people what's going on. And that's why I think, especially when the bad times happen, that's when I need to be more accountable. That's when I need to show up the most and say, hey, today was an awful day, but this is what I'm learning from it, and this is how I'm going to move forward.
When I got sober, if you count from the first time I went to rehab to when the last time I actually used drugs, it took me 4 years. And people always ask me, it's like, well, they know so many people who never got out of drug addiction. They're like, well, how did you do it? And my answer is always like, I didn't. Like it took a whole army of people around me to help me get through it. But at some point during those 4 years, close to the end when I last used, I made the conscious decision that I didn't want to continue living this way, and I was going to do anything that it took to ensure that I did not return back to that lifestyle, regardless of how uncomfortable and embarrassing it might seem in the moment.
Yeah, and you know what? That resonates so much with me when you speak in that way, because that's essentially what I feel like I'm doing right now in public, right? I'm very transparent about my feelings and how I'm feeling and why this is happening. And I think doing that is also just making myself feel more confident. Like I feel comfortable in my skin when I wasn't before. I feel like these things that I thought was such a huge, stigma, I can talk about it because you know what? That's me and that's my reality. And it's a take it or leave it type of situation. And again, it's just such a place of growth and learning. And if that's a place where I can continue to learn about myself, then I'll be as public as I can be for as long as I can be if it holds me accountable.
Yeah, that's huge. And I hope anybody else who's listening or watching this and they're feeling anything, pulling at their hearts right now, that they really hear this, because that's essentially it. The first time I ever shared my history of drug addiction on social media, I was terrified because in my mind I was like, oh, everybody's going to judge me. They're going to think less of me. What's going to happen? But what you're probably experiencing, well, I know you're experiencing it because I've been in your YouTube comments, is you're sharing your own journey. You're putting yourself out there. You're being vulnerable because it's what you're going through. And 9 times out of 10, there's other people that reach out like, I'm going through the same thing. That confidence and that comfortability of being yourself when you realize that we're all going through these things.
Yeah. I want to share real quick, because when I was gone for almost those 2.5 years, what brought me back was I I work as a freelance photographer, and I was working at a portraiture studio, and they had to do some test shooting, and someone took a photo of me at the studio where I posed and it looked like a yearbook picture. And it was so funny to me. And I thought it was hilarious. And I wanted to share that with people, but I was so scared because for those almost 2.5 years, I was completely silent on social media. And I just said, forget it, I'm going to post it. And I did. And when I posted it on my Finally Fasting Instagram, the outpour of comments and people liking it, they were just like, we're just so happy to see you. We're happy that you're here. And I didn't even think about fasting then. I just wanted to post that photo because I thought it was funny. And I was learning, I was already going through therapy, and I was learning to accept myself and tell myself that I have worth. But that is what sparked me to start again. It was because of the community. It was them that got me to really start this. And now I just want to lead by example. And this is kind of where I'm at this point.
And that's why I think I've connected so well with you, is because you and I have similar visions. Like when I think about what is it that I really want to do, I want to build bridges and bring people together, right? Rather than divide them and, try to contradict them and prove who's right or wrong. Like we're all on this journey, and I do believe that God's placed us here, and the hard things that we go through them so that we can help others through them as well.
Yeah, I love that. I resonate with that as well. I just think there's so much misinformation out there, and there's so many things, like you said, that contradict other people. And I don't understand why we have to go through this back and forth, like either team red or team blue or whatever it is. And it's more just, hey, this is what we're all doing right now. I like to look at things very simply, and I like to look at my life right now as happy and healthy. Those are the two most important things that I am trying to look for. At the end of the day, that's all I want, is to be happy and healthy. No matter how I get there, it might not be the optimal way. It might not be the most perfect way of doing it, but I'm going to do as much as I can to be happy and healthy and learn from it.
I don't care how you do it. I just want you to do something. Like you have to test something out to find out what works, what doesn't work for you. And I'll tell you, like I spent 5 years figuring out what doesn't work for me, which eventually led me to find out what does work for me. So if you're thinking that fasting might work for you, then by all means, give it a shot. But let me take a back step there after having said that. When you got back into it, or if somebody's brand new to fasting, would you recommend they just be like, oh, I'm going to do what Jerome's doing and I'm going to fast for 90 hours and refeed for 4? Like, what would you recommend? How should somebody get started? Say they're brand new to fasting.
So no, I wouldn't recommend just going off a 90-hour fast and having a 4-hour eating window. One thing that I will always tell people is just because I fast for 90 hours doesn't mean that you have to fast for 90 hours. Just because I eat 5,000 calories doesn't mean that you have to eat for 5,000 calories. I say that all the time, but you'd be surprised how there are so many people in the comments who are trying to imitate that way. And that isn't how it works. You really have to find what works for you, especially if this is your first time fasting. One of my questions is, have you ever done a 16-8? And if you haven't, sometimes that's the place to start. I understand that people want big goals, and I'm all supportive of people who want big goals. If they want to do a 7-day fast, if they want to do a 2-week fast, or even a 1-month fast, I can support that. But that's where I talk about, okay, what if you can't get to that number? I'm not saying that you can't do it, but in the chance that you're not able to do the 30-day fast you told yourself and you're only able to go 3 days, let's talk about a backup plan. And then we can kind of go from there. But the thing about doing something for that long too is what happens after that? And how are you able to continue to lose the weight? Are you going to do another 30-day fast? And that's sometimes why I like to employ taking the small steps if you have to. And it might not be a 16-8. Maybe 16-8 is not enough. And maybe you do need to do an OMAD where you fast for 23 hours and then you eat for 1. Or you implement an alternate day fast and you eat every other day. Or you start to pepper in some OMAD days when you're having hard days. It's making a plan, pushing forward with it, but also having a backup plan in place just in case. What are you going to do if you can't do what you intended to do? And are you hitting that fasting timer over and over again? I think, and like we talked about earlier, it's consistency over length. How consistent can you be in your good habits, not with just fasting, but are you doing the exercise you talked about doing? Are you getting the quality sleep that you said you were going to do? All of these things play a huge part in the consistency, in the growth, and building your fasting muscle.
I think so many of us fall into that trap of like all or nothing thinking, right? Where it's like we have this perfect plan, and if we can't hit that perfect plan, then we're not going to do anything at all. But once you actually start walking through these things and testing them out, you'll find that no matter how perfect your plan is, it never goes according to plan. So I think that's really important. What you're saying is the backup plans. And you mentioned each person has their own individual journey, you know, testing out different things, coming up with a personalized plan. So if anybody's interested in getting in touch with you, because I know you do offer coaching and accountability one-on-one, could you tell people where they can learn more about that?
The easiest way is to go to Calendly. I have a place where you can set up a free 15-minute consultation if it's just talking about what your journey might look like and how I can help you. But a lot of this really, for most people that I've been coaching, a lot of it is an accountability type thing. A lot of people feel pretty knowledgeable when it comes to fasting or how they should eat. And they always tell me, I know what I need to do. I just can't do it consistently. And that's kind of where I will pop in. And just like I'm being accountable on YouTube and sharing my story and sharing my numbers, that's kind of what I offer on the opposite end. I'll give people like a spreadsheet that they can fill out, and it's just something that we share together, and I get to look at your progress. You get to be honest about yourself. We put a plan and implement a strategy, and that's usually how it works. I mean, there's also, again, this is why it's so personalized, because there's also that mental process behind it. Even though you might know what to do, and even if you don't know what to do, sometimes it's talking about the root cause, like, why did you get to where you're at right now? What are the reasons that you're turning to food for whatever issue or whatever might be happening? I think a big part of this is really unpeeling or unraveling those parts about yourself that you might not like to bring up because they might be uncomfortable. It might feel awkward. But I think the more you can bring that out and the more you can be honest with yourself, that's a huge start in just getting onto this journey.
We will link up your Calendly link in the description of this video, link up a link to your YouTube channel, which, if anyone's wondering, is called Finally Fasting. Definitely check it out. I will warn you, you will end up binging a bunch of the videos because they're all really good. There's lots of nuggets and lots of encouragement.